When we think of terrifying opponents in boxing, we often picture someone muscular with broad shoulders, perhaps a fast twitch fighter who packs dynamite in his hands, capable of ending a fight in a single clean punch. But I beg to differ. The most terrifying character in fighting is this relentless and unbreakable pressure fighter that just won't stop. What makes this type so terrifying is their ability to take punishment while constantly moving forward, never giving their opponent a chance to breathe or rest. No matter how many shots they absorb, they just keep coming on forward like a zombie, the walking dead, so to speak. Now, you can be the greatest boxing tactician in the world with very solid fundamentals, great footwork, great angles and whatnot, but if you're up against a freakish pressure fighter like this that can take punishment for days and never stop moving forward, well, the only two choices you have is to either match their pace or finish the fight. Either way, both of those are very difficult against someone like this. We might say with a little bit of exaggeration that a type of fighter like this will test an opponent's will more than their technique or tactics, so to speak. In boxing, or any sport for that matter, there are principles that are shaped by years of refinement and knowledge being passed down from generation after generation. And one of those principles is to always assume unpredictability, of hiding your intentions. However, there are always exceptions. Some fighters, they simply don't rely on unpredictability. In fact, everyone knows what they are going to do. They know exactly what their plan is, but they don't have a response for it. How do you even prepare for a fighter like this? Where can you find a training partner that can emulate a style like this? And even if you have the greatest plan, the tactics in the world, the second step becomes actually matching the pace, because by definition, if you have an unbreakable forward moving force like this that doesn't stop, you have no choice, you have to match it in order to even make your game plan work in the first place. And if you're thinking of finishing the fight, well, this guy has very solid fundamentals. He has a very tight and compact guard when he gets to this close range, so it's extremely difficult to find openings on him. So no, being predictable, it just doesn't matter for him. He knows that most of his opponents will not have an answer anyways. They might be able to match his pace or even outwork him for the first minute or even an entire round, but very rarely will they be able to keep up this pace the entire fight. Eventually they will crumble and succumb to the inevitable fatigue that will rise. So in my opinion, a pressure fighter like this is the most terrifying to face in the ring. If you're not moving, he's hitting you. If he's hitting you, he doesn't stop. It's like a relentless sandstorm just pursuing you, and the more you look away, the more you try to cover yourself, the more you will suffer for it. So you just desperately seek for shelter, and it just doesn't stop. Now here is the thing, as cliché and fortune cookie-ish as this might sound, all of us have a unique genetic makeup that is further developed by all of the experiences and the environment we have gone through, both physically and personality-wise. There has never been and never will be an exact genetic copy of you. You're a one-time deal. That makes us all predisposed to certain attributes and traits. And this goes to athleticism as well. Some athletes, they simply have an inherent gas tank for days, others are more twitchy and explosive, and others will be somewhere in the middle. The key lies in identifying yourself, personality-wise, athletic-wise, everything. The more you know yourself, your strengths and weaknesses, the more you can find this sort of style that suits you, the more you can establish your brand. Believe it or not, but every single fighter and athlete in general, they have their own brand. So with all of these factors in mind, anatomy, genetics, proportion of muscle fibers, personality things such as competitiveness, analytic ability, whatever it might be, with time, with dedication and some introspection, you will finally find a trademark, something that you just do better than everybody else, a sort of niche, a certain moat that is so hard to break through, that is acquired from years of trial and error and introspection. And when speaking of these moats in boxing specifically, we might think of Mayweather's amazing defensive ability, his ability to slip punches with his shoulder roll, or we might think of Mike Tyson's combination of explosive power and the peekaboo style. We might think of Lomachenko's footwork and his ability to create angles and step around opponents. And of course, Kishniak's trademark, which is a relentless forward pressure, inside fighting, and an inhuman endurance. So in the end, to a certain extent, it's just a battle of trademarks. Is your trademark stronger than your opponent's trademark? Now obviously I don't want to give the wrong message here. It's not all about physical attributes here. Yes, he is an endurance freak, he has a capacity for days, but it's not all about physical attributes. He's also a master of inside fighting. This is his world. This is what he has been practicing for years, day in, day out, in every single boxing session. He has found the department at which he excels, and above all, he is a master of taking the fight to where he is the strongest and his opponent is the weakest. As some people might think, he is not reckless, he is a defensive genius. He has adjusted his style so that it works. The very reason his aggressive, forward-moving style works in the first place is because of his amazing defense. Now some critics might notice Hizniak's style, that he crosses his legs sometimes to get closer to the opponent, and sometimes they call this unrefined, but they are missing the point, because his primary objective is to get on the inside as quickly as possible, and sometimes to achieve that he will naturally cross his legs to accelerate forward faster, rather than maintaining a traditional style, so to speak. Once on the inside, he has an incredibly tight and compact guard. Good luck finding openings on this guy. He absorbs the majority of his shots on the guard, and in this regard his fundamentals are very solid, they are exceptional. From an outside observer it might look chaotic and ugly, which it is to a certain extent, but it is very technically refined. He also implements a form of catch and pitch style as characterized by Teddy Atlas, which involves catching or deflecting an incoming punch. Atlas uses the analogy of catching a ball to explain the action of receiving a punch, and then after blocking, he just uses the inertia of the block to quickly follow up with a counter punch, taking advantage of this opening that is created. So it's like a defensive and offensive action in one harmonious movement, the opponent's attack and your counter punch combined into one action. And this style is especially effective when it comes to close range combat. Now, this begs the question, how is this possible? How can someone have an inhuman, freakish endurance like this? There are a couple of reasons. Now, genetically, we all have proportions of 3 types of muscle fibers. We have type 1, type 2A, and type 2X. So your arms, your legs, your core, everywhere, they are composed of a proportion of these fibers. Some are more powerful, but more susceptible to fatigue, and some have more endurance, but are less powerful. So if you were to dissect a muscle, we would find variance in color in the fibers, with the most powerful fibers being whiter in color and the slower and more endurant types being more densely red because of the high levels of myoglobin and capillaries which transport blood because they are dependent on oxygen. Now at first glance one might perceive Hizniak as an aerobic fighter, a type 1 that is, but when you observe his punches, they are hard shots for ridiculous quantities. It's like he's throwing punches that would be characteristic of a fast twitch type 2X fighter, but he just never gets tired despite throwing so many high effort shots. There has to be more factors to it. How can he throw so many hard, high effort shots at such large quantities and seemingly never getting tired? To understand that, we first have to understand what fatigue is. How exactly do we define fatigue, and what causes it? Now, in scientific fancy-pantsy language, it can be reduced to a bodily response that increases one's desire to cease the activity due to discomfort. I think we can all agree on that. And this discomfort obviously is caused by a release of various byproducts into the bloodstream, including lactate and hydrogen ions, which comes from anaerobic metabolism, as well as the depletion of energy sources like glycogen or creatine. And this type of fatigue can be classified as physical or peripheral fatigue, for the fancy term again. A lesser known type of fatigue, however, is that of the brain. This is called central fatigue, and as the name implies, you simply feel tired in your brain, because your brain, like the muscles, they become fatigued after a long period of intensely recruiting motor units. Every single muscular action, high effort, low effort, using your wrist to write something on a paper, or punching a heavy bag with their life, it relies on signaling from the brain that travels through the spinal cord into the muscles, and the intensity of the action depends on the amount of motor units you can recruit. And your brain, like the muscles, they become fatigued after a long period of intensely recruiting these motor units. And undoubtedly, central fatigue is an enormous area with numerous contributing factors. We have serotonin levels, we have emotional aspects such as anxiety and anger, environmental aspects such as an optimistic or pessimistic environment, the list goes on. It's a very complex topic. So regardless of the type of fatigue that we're discussing, there are a couple of deciding factors, and this includes the athlete's fitness, experience, genetics, and psychological strength. A physically fit, experienced, and psychologically adept athlete will recover more quicker, be less aroused and anxious in various situations, so it will regulate the stress hormones, and it will reduce the severity of both peripheral and central fatigue. And then comes defining endurance. How do we even define that? It's easy to attribute endurance to just cardio, you think of some long distance runner with a tank top and a sweatband running for 10 kilometers straight and whatnot. Perhaps a conditioning we have gotten from Hollywood movies and all of that, but there is actually a lot more into that. Cardio is just an abbreviation of cardiovascular, which describes aerobic metabolism, but endurance could more accurately be defined as the ability to delay the onset of fatigue and endure it when it occurs. If we define it this way, there is a lot more factors to cover. As you can see here, we have aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity, neuromuscular factors, we have movement efficiency, motor control, all of these subcategories that work together like an intricate clockwork. Change one component and 5 other components are affected. It is a complex system. You cannot attribute it to just one single quality or cogwheel, so to speak. And these are only the physical or biochemical aspects or the coordination aspects. We also have a whole other world out there, the psychological aspect. How willing is the athlete in the first place to endure fatigue? Suppose a hypothetical scenario where we have 2 exact genetic copies of athletes, the exact, let's say, anatomical proportion or the genetics and whatnot, like physically speaking. Of course that's impossible, but let's imagine that. Except one of the athletes has a stronger psychology, they are more willing to endure fatigue despite the same objective amount of biochemicals being released into the blood. So sometimes it's just a matter of one athlete being able to accept and mentally cope with fatigue better. So a lot of times we're always focused on the physical aspects like aerobic capacity and anaerobic capacity, which we should, but the psychological aspects are neglected. These are also important, developing psychological strength. And above all, motivation and incentive. How important is the task for you? Suppose you have just ran a marathon, whatever, and your house is under fire, and you hear the screams from someone dear to you. You need to save them from this burning house. In that case, it wouldn't matter how fatigued you were or how sore you were, whether your ankle was sprained and whatnot. You would sprint up that house, you would forget every sensation of fatigue or soreness and whatever to save your loved ones. Now suppose you're in an Olympic gold medal match with 2 athletes that objectively have pretty good aerobic capacity, anaerobic capacity and whatnot, but the urgency of winning that match is similar to the urgency of saving your loved one from a burning house, so to speak. You have the sort of incentive, the reward that you look forward to, or you have the consequences that you want to avoid. In Hizniak's case, for example, I don't want to make dramatic conclusions because I don't know, I'm just guessing here, but I think of boxing and I think of a high national pride being placed upon this boxing match. Ukraine is a big boxing culture. They look at these people like heroes, and there is national pride tied to this. So he wants to save face and display Ukraine in a high regard, so he has sort of this incentive to win in boxing. And naturally, when we have an incentive, when we sense urgency, the stakes are high, it sometimes in the right people brings out a new gear that you never knew existed. And then of course there is one last component that we have to discuss, and that is relaxation. How ridiculously important it is to be relaxed when it comes to endurance, of movement efficiency, so to speak. When most people think of endurance, what typically comes to mind are your 5K numbers, how fast you can run a 10K, rowing, assault bikes and whatnot, and all of these are very good. I get it. But let's suppose you're backed into a corner and you're met with a barrage of punches from an opponent. You try to go to your left, but the opponent follows up. You try to go to your right, same thing. You're just trapped. And then a powerful shot lands on your chin, you tense up, and before you even have processed what has occurred, another shot follows up and you're rocked, you're isolated in this corner. And for especially inexperienced athletes, they would tense up and they would go into fight or flight mode. You would have various stress hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol being released, and your energy expenditure would just shoot up. In such a scenario, it would not matter if you can run a 5K in world-class numbers. You will get tired anyways. As a natural inclination, you want to tense up here, of course, but you have to go against that and remain clear-headed and relaxed. And this is the importance of relaxation when it comes to conserving energy, which indirectly adds to your endurance. And conversely, if you're the aggressor, as Hizniak appears to be most often, with a fighting style that delivers endless combinations and forward pressure, although it might appear that he is very tense in there trying to end his opponent with every shot, he is actually very relaxed and he paces himself very well. He displays excellent movement economy, breathing out with every punch. He conserves energy despite seemingly looking very aggressive. He is aggressive, yes, but he does it in an efficient, economical way. Now, very sadly, there is not a lot of training footage of him, but I can imagine that aside from his high intensity intervals that he probably does, he also puts a lot of training into pacing and mindfulness and controlled breathing. Since his style is so bound to stamina and constant pressure, he probably does everything in his capacity to aid this attribute, approaching it from every possible, improvable entry point, both physically and psychologically. The first conclusion that beginner boxers often draw when they get tired quickly is, I lack fitness, I need to up my 10k runs, my 5k runs, I need to do endurance 5 times a week. And I always answer, it doesn't matter, you're just new, you're too tense. It doesn't matter what physical attributes you have if you're tense all the time. You need to know how to relax and pace yourself and remain calm under pressure. One very fascinating study compared the performance of soccer players who were given cues to promote relaxation, such as smiling and loosening up, to a control group that played normally without any specific instruction. And then we had a third group that were encouraged to frown and tense up their muscles, and the results indicated that players who followed the relaxation cues had a significantly higher running economy than the other groups. Very fascinating study. That's it for this video. I hope you learned something new. If you're interested, you can read an article that I wrote about this also for more specific information. And if you wanna go to my website, you also find training programs and coaching and a bunch of other services. Thanks for watching.